All right, my friends, this is a treat for me. I've talked with Georgie before from Ukraine Matters, and I want to tell you a little story before I introduce him. And we're going to talk about like the European perspective of what they've seen related to Ukraine about like that Oval Office meeting, and then how Ukraine is being treated, how the Europeans are actually processing this. Are they going to get together and actually do something? Is it a lot of talk? What is it like? So that's why Georgie's here. But I want to tell a story here first. So I just passed 100,000 subscribers last night. And so thank you. I appreciate that. So I just passed that last night. And I mean, I'm happy for all of you to be here. I'm glad that people are being informed, but there was nothing that was nearly as meaningful to me as something that Georgie did. He might not even have realized this early on. So I started doing this in the summer of 2022. I wrote that little ebook about Zelensky, and I was tracking that. And I was like, man, I should just be doing this on YouTube. All the information has gone away. And so from the summer of 2022 until about December, it took me until about December to hit 1,000 subscribers. And then my mom was sick. Now, if you're paying attention here on my channel, you know my mom just passed a week ago, and so I was at the funeral a week and a half ago, and I was at the funeral, and so that's why I wasn't here for a while. My mom just passed, but in January of 2022, my mom was critically ill, and my brother said, "Hey, look, you got to get here. Just like she's got 72 hours according to the doctor." And so I went up there, and then when I went up there, I wasn't doing anything there either. Like I was just kind of off, and but I periodically look at it. I was like, "Oh, why are my numbers going up? Like people like it better when I'm not on." Well, that's because Georgia had given me a shout out apparently at that time. And I don't know if you remember this, but people kept coming over, and it took me a while to figure out what was happening. But people said, "Yeah, Georgie from Ukraine Matters said, check out Dr. Gerdes," and apparently that's what was going on at that time. So and that those numbers in those early days meant so much because when you're so small. So I've been trying to pass that forward to other people. So Georgie, thank you for joining me, and thank you for that. I want to say that publicly because that was pretty awesome of you.
I appreciate it, but yeah, I hope we can support all of the pro-Ukraine creators. We need more voices, and your voice is very unique, very different perspective, very unique perspective. So appreciate that you're sticking with us and that you are the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.
Hey, there you go. That's a pretty good tagline, I think. So yeah, no, I mean, and that's what we need to be about, right? So okay, let's get into, and I do try to pass that forward. I try to find smaller creators that are in this category that are trying to be helpful and give them some sunlight. So okay, so let's talk about what has happened over the last week or so. It's been quite a ride, and we can start with setting the table with the terrible Oval Office dust up that okay, so let's start with that. How do you perceive what happened? I know how I perceive it. I mean, I don't see it as Zelensky doing anything to cause that. I see like if you put the best face, I try to. If you watch me, you know that try to put the best face on things. Generally speaking, I try to not like read into what's going on. But it just seems like Vance was trying to cause a fight. Like he was trying to be antagonistic, and I don't think Zelensky did anything worth being, like they came out and were kind of, how could he come in here and talk like that? He was just saying, like, what diplomacy? Like 25 times. What do you mean by diplomacy? So, and that became you're embarrassing. Tell me what your perception was of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here, Professor. Obviously, I cannot speak for all Europeans. I am a staunch supporter of Ukraine and a hawk. There's a lot of people in Europe that are having different types of positions. A lot of peaceniks, a lot of people that just want peace and throw flowers at the Russians and expect them to just surrender. There's various people, but at least I can give you perspective of the people like majority, absolute majority in Denmark that are staunchly big supporters for Ukraine. And when we look at that meeting, and specifically, I kind of a little bit am surprised that a lot of the analysis that I'm hearing about specifically the meeting comes like it's been happening in vacuum, like there was no
Good point.
setup beforehand, that there wasn't like a week beforehand that there's going to be that Zelensky is a dictator, or that we should be continuously pressuring Zelensky to come to negotiating table, that on his campaign Trump would not say that that would be exactly his strategy, what he's going to do, like when he was just being a candidate. So for me personally, like that moment when I understood that there is not going to be good cooperation between the United States and Ukraine was pretty much when Trump got elected.
Hmm.
Everything after that, the first month, it was actually way above my expectation, way
Yeah.
above, up to the level that I actually started again listening to some of the pro-Trump voices in my community, which those people still exist. Not a lot. A lot of them are really despising my guts by now, but there are still people that are still supporting Ukraine and are watching my content despite everything, and I appreciate them by that for that. But with regards to that meeting, I didn't see a lot of specifics being put together of what was predating that, because we saw that
Yeah.
Trump and his campaign and what they were doing and pushing, that they wanted to put pressure on Russia. They failed. It's very clear that Russia, and what Lavrov has been stating right beforehand, stating that the only thing that the one that they need from Ukraine and the United States is that Ukraine just surrender those 4 regions that Russia still not even close to controlling. They're not controlling even any kind of big something that is bigger than just a town, like a small regional town. The only
Hmm.
thing they were controlling is Kherson, and Kherson, well, they were kicked out of Kherson. Unfortunately, not destroyed fully, but as far as I understood, that was the part of the plan. Now that the analysis came out, because Ukrainians just didn't want to turn Kherson into the ruins, so they
Hmm.
let the Russians essentially escape. And so that in that sense, I was expecting that it's going to be something like this, that there's going to be some kind of pressure campaign on Zelensky. And by knowing Ukrainians very clearly, I right away was, even before that meeting happened, was stating, and not only me actually, you don't need to listen to me like I'm just a YouTuber. Let's take Anas Pak Nilsson, like
Hmm.
you know him, right? I think you even had a conversation with him. He's a Danish military analyst, very nice person. Like he does very good analysis, and he specifically stated that Trump is having issues with his plan, because what he's
What plan?
yeah, exactly. So his expectations that he's just going to waltz in, put kind of pressure on Russia and put pressure on Ukraine, is just going to hit the hard wall of reality, that Russians are not going to agree with him and Ukrainians are not going to agree with them. And then we're going to actually see the the revelation of what Trump will actually do, only when that reality is going to be essentially coming in close contact with his face, so to say. And
Hmm.
and that's exactly what we saw in that meeting, right? For Trump, this was he felt, I don't know how he felt, obviously I don't know, but that did seem that their administration felt conflicted, that they didn't see the right way forward, and they wanted to apply pressure on someone to try to get this peace deal through. And obviously they have zero leverage on Russia, absolutely zero leverage on Russia,
Yeah.
but
So
they
that's
do
interesting.
assume, yeah, they do assume that they have strong leverage on Ukraine, and they do have some leverage, but that leverage not as strong, but they think it is. And that the discrepancy of the expectations and attitude, that's exactly what we saw in that meeting. Like
Okay.
how it happened and so on, we can discuss.
So tell me what you think they think is leverage on Russia, because what I see is all the pressure is on Ukraine,
Yeah,
just
zero.
telling
There's zero. No.
Russia, like, yeah, I mean, maybe we'll lift sanctions or something. Like, I don't see where the pressure is to make Russia come to the table. And when Putin gets antagonistic, I think Trump may very well turn. I don't know. Again, the prediction game is kind of foolish, right? So there are some people that say, "Well, Trump's just a Manchurian candidate. He's just going to do whatever Putin wants." I don't know. If Putin decides not to come to the table or not to make some kind of agreement, I think you might see the screws turn that way, but I just don't know. This is my speculation. So what do you see? Why isn't there any pressure on Russia like there is on Ukraine?
Well, with regards to is Trump a Manchurian candidate and is so on, well, he obviously likes Putin. Like that. That's
Yeah,
that's not like a big secret. Like let's
that's
not
clear.
let's not even like pretend, right? So he obviously doesn't like Zelensky. They have a lot of bad blood, starting with Joe Biden, and Zelensky and Trump's attitude never was very very good. So we already have that established, and then everything else from me is just explained by Hanlon's razor. Just don't attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by incompetence.
Mhm.
And for me, the absolute majority of what has been said and stated and discussed has been explained by incompetence. And a lot of Trump's talking points, I specifically talked about the video, they come directly from Putin. So I can easily
Mhm.
imagine that they just, because Russian propaganda is different. Russian propaganda comes in very different flavors depending on what kind of source it is and what kind of audience it targets. When Putin speaks, his talking points and propaganda narratives are very different than a popular propaganda narrative that are for the masses, very different from propaganda narratives that are for the internal audience within Russia. Very, very different. And the talking points specifically that Trump repeated, like, for example, that Zelensky is a dictator, that there is a low support for Zelensky, that there is a lot of Russian speakers, and we need to get elections. Those narratives are specifically Putin's
From Putin.
narratives.
That's
Like
right.
those narratives are not general Russian propaganda narratives. So I could easily see that he would have this conversation with his wanted to be buddy Putin, that they would discuss what is happening, how we can come to peace deal, and so on. And then they would try to see how they can get to Zelensky. And then this is where the incompetence parts come in, where we saw that before the negotiations even officially started, any kind of negotiating positions were already given up to Russia, because
Mhm.
you cannot state openly stating that, well, we're ready to give up territories for Ukraine. They will need to get territories. Ukraine will definitely not join NATO. Ukraine will definitely be either demilitarized or something. They will definitely need to be kind of pushed away. You're giving away all of your position. Even if the fact that they walked back it, that is already not saving you. You
Mhm.
already gave everything away. You already shown that you're not ready to defend these positions staunchly. It's not a discussable position. And Russia saw that, and Russia is never was expecting to negotiate in good faith. For them, this is just an opportunity to delay aid for Ukraine, or what is happening right now, stop it completely. This is a major win for Russia. This is everything that they wanted from negotiations. They never cared about getting any kind of deal. That is not
Yeah.
their point.
Yeah, so you were about to say, or you were starting to say that Russia's never going to negotiate in good faith. How strongly do you feel about that? Because that is kind of how I see things. I don't see Russia unless they get maximalist demands, like give us all these four oblasts and a buffer zone between Kiev and there. I mean, unless they get something like that, that they're not going to negotiate in good faith. They're just going to. I mean, tell me how you see that. I mean, I see that even if they get to the table, things will delay and delay and delay and delay and delay because Russia's just going to stone. Well, that's my perspective, but I could be wrong.
No, it's not necessarily delay. Like they could use a pause. Like if they sign Minsk, what is it now, 4? They would be very happy. They would be very, very happy about it. And if they also say that Ukraine is also going to be forced to essentially sign off some of the regions to them, hey, great. Like because the only people say about these Istanbul discussions, Istanbul negotiations that started at the war, there was nothing there. Like it was just Russia rolling out their maximalist demands,
Mhm,
and that's pretty much where the conversation ended, right?
mhm.
So there was no agreement, no one signed anything, no one agreed to anything. It was just Russia stating their position, and Ukrainians have acknowledged that these are the positions that Russia have stated. That's where
And
the
Trump
negotiations ended.
and Trump says you should have taken that deal. Oh, really? It's
It wasn't a deal. It was a capitulation agreement. It was
yeah.
literally like, we want Ukraine to capitulate. Like, we want Ukraine to reduce their armed forces, removed any kind of advanced weaponry. We want to have all of the regions that we declared ourselves in the constitution. And the richest one is the best one. It's the one that I love the most. Is in a case of any further aggression and conflict between Russian Federation and Ukraine, Russian Federation leaves a veto power to deny any kind of aid from any third parties to Ukraine.
How about that? That's a good deal if you can get it. Tell you what. Okay, so let me go back to one other thing. So I think Trump is is not ideologically Like, he you're right about his friendship with Putin, like, he likes to think that he's buddies with Putin. He doesn't really get on with Zelensky, we get that. Um, but I don't think he's ideological at his core in the same way that Reagan is ideological or Obama is ideological, and you can kind of predict where they're going. So let's roll back the clock 2 weeks, and Zelensky's a dictator. The night before the thing, you said he's a dictator. Did I say that? Like, what? And then he was saying he's the best president of Ukraine or what? I'm like, okay, so he vacillates, but you see this same kind of behavior. Kim Jong Un, he's the worst thing ever. He's little rocket man. He's whatever. No, no, he's a great guy. If you understand the context, whenever anybody is doing what Trump wants, he's the best thing ever, and whenever he's not doing the thing he wants, he's the so I think you have to add that context into whatever's happening in there. Okay, if you want to talk about that, you can talk about that, but I want to move on post the Oval Office as well, and like what just happened after the Oval Office. Every European leader except for Orban came out with great support. So pick us up at that point and how Europe was processing from there.
Yeah, it's a rude wake up call for a lot of Europe. Obviously, everyone was hoping that at least NATO alliance is unbreakable, and for people saying it's like, well, it's clearly unbreakable. United States is still going to be protecting Europe. The agreement is still there. They haven't quit NATO. NATO is not automatic, right? The whole point of the collective defense agreement is built on trust,
Mhm.
and that trust needs to be in a sense of if there is enemy forces crossing the border tomorrow, I need to be dead sure. Like every alliance member needs to be stated as like that our forces are going to come in to protect you in
Mhm.
case of this. Like in the same sense that is right now this agreement between. Imagine like this: if you would be Poland and someone would invade the Baltics, like would you go protect that? And the answer would be just yes.
Mhm.
As soon as that answer is like we will see or maybe what is like this ambiguity, that is exactly what Trump introduced. That's it. That
Yeah.
no more trust. Nothing is there. So obviously our politicians are still trying to present like a good face, with a good side of the face towards us, but they're black and blue on the other side, completely beaten to the ground by what was happening because pretty much Trump reduced to zero any kind of a trust in that agreement because
Yeah.
there is no agreement with Trump's. It's all about vibes. If he doesn't feel so, if he doesn't feel that you have done sufficiently lately, then it doesn't matter. It's been already because even when it started talking about the spending, right? Spending about the NATO and so on, how much countries are spending. It was very clearly that there were countries that were not spending enough on defense and NATO,
Yeah.
but those were not the countries that were bordering Russia.
Yeah.
Like
So isn't that interesting? The closer you are to Russia, the more you're paying attention to that sort of thing. And yeah. Yeah.
correct,
Okay.
correct. So it was a talking point.
y-
Therefore, just to kind of finish answering your question,
Yeah.
so for European leaders, it was a wake up call. They're still trying to see if they can salvage and work essentially around Trump
Mhm.
and maybe get some kind of agreements, negotiations, weapon supply. But it with every day past, it feels that this realization that there is no more trust between us is sinking in. Now everyone is just trying to see can we at least salvage like our general relationships.
Yeah, yeah. So I got to give Starmer and Macron good credit for the way that they approached Trump, and were like, that Macron and Trump, or even Starmer, right? Starmer's pretty on the left, Trump's on the right. They don't get along about a lot of things, I'm sure, but they got along swimmingly, talking about their good relationship and their and while still reaffirming the values of that are common and trying to you know, make it as smooth as possible. So I give them credit for that. But in Europe, it seems like okay, let me say it from the way that the MAGA side is looking at it. Hey, Europe, you've been not having to spend on this, and we're spending to protect you, and that's going to stop. Like that's the way that they're seeing this, and I think that's actually what's going to play out. And I mean, it's weird to think that Trump is accidentally or maybe willfully, I don't know, causing you Europe to actually have to step up and create their own real defense that they've been under a kind of a hazy protective something for too long, and they really need to step up and have their own legitimate defense, as opposed to just, yeah, I'll do this little part, I'll do that little part. I mean, I've seen things about a common European army. I don't know that that will work out very well. I can't. I mean, historically, looking back at it, Europe wasn't really all playing nice together. So I don't know about that, but it looks like Europe's going to have to really meaningfully step up. Now the question is, will it? But okay, that's tell me what you think there.
Yeah, and we Europe has been stepping up, like not in a scale that we have been doing so far, but if you look at the NATO projections, their documents this year, absolute dominant majority of countries in Europe has hit over 2% of their defense spending, which was required by NATO. It's not about facts. We're like Trump and MAGA and everything is the ultimate post-truth
Mhm.
movement.
Yeah,
So it's
they
not about facts, it's about vibes, right? So it doesn't matter if Europe factually spends more to support Ukraine. It doesn't matter if Europe factually is already over 2% spending altogether. It doesn't matter factually that we are deploying the troops and preparing to defend and so on and so on and so on. It does not matter. What matters is the vibes. That is what matters, because the vibes right now in the United States, and at least in the head of Donald Trump and his gang, is that they are weak, they are unfocused, and European Union cannot do anything. Ukraine is as big of a test for Europe as it is for Ukraine itself. For Europe,
yeah, that's really profound. Yeah, I think you're
yeah,
right.
for Europe, this is a test basically of our geopolitical standing. If they state, because what Trump wants, like what Trump and his vibes want, that he wants us to essentially solve our problems, and when we almost are solving our problems, when we're drafting our agreements, we want to invite him and says it is all thank you to Donald Trump without him doing anything. That is what he wants. That is his ultimate agreement. In Europe, a lot of politicians, unfortunately, still have this mommy issues or daddy issues, whatever you like, where they say, okay, we have a lot of issues, we can solve some of them, but we want mommy or daddy to come and help us with the big things. And that is the struggle of the Europeans to overcome. Like not the defense, not the spending, not the even United European Army and so on. No, there is a one specific problem that needs solving right now in Europe that will put Europe in a way that will essentially align us with even the Trump administration. It is solve our problems ourselves,
Mm.
get Trump, paint him in a good light that he helped a lot, and then maybe he will send troops back, and then NATO agreement is going to be back in force, and so on. That's it. That's only thing is. So we need to take responsibility, but not in a public way, not in by crying, not by yelling. No, we need to understand that if we want good Ukraine to have good agreements, if we want to have strong Europe, then we need to get there and we need to put that strong agreement on the table before Trump. Otherwise, he's just going to walk over our heads, and that's it.
Yeah, and they were even talking about like, well, Europe's not going to be at the table. We're going to make this agreement, and then you saw some of the pushback saying, with the meeting on Sunday. I'm sure you were paying attention to this, what was happening in London, and the all the statements that came out of that, and talking about like we're going to set something up, and then we're going to inform the U.S. of what we've set up, which was kind of an interesting reverse. Now, if they actually freaking do it, that's wonderful, right? But are they actually going I guess my question is, are they actually going to do it? Because they just have been they've been a lot more talk than they've been action, and I'm not denigrating, like, I'm not, like, coming here as an American denigrating that, or I'm not doing that. I'm a Republican, but I'm not pro-Trump. Like, I if you think you're frustrated with Trump, imagine how I feel, where I've got no other place to go in my party, and I know I'm a minority point of view, and I can't persuade, like, enough people to get yeah. So, I'm not doing that, but will they do it? Like, so they're talking about, 100 some odd billion or of a loan. This was yesterday for Ukraine. Okay, that's good. That's not nothing. It's a step forward. And 800 billion or 900 billion from the EU, but that's for your own defense. Like that's not actually going to Ukraine. Like Ukraine's the critical thing right now. So will they do what they need to do? Is I guess what I'm trying to understand.
Yes, yes. So
Good.
there are two moments here. So the factual moment is that, and just remind me that I want also to say the unfactual moment. So the
Okay.
factual moment is the 800 billion. This is not like EU. In Europe, we need to understand that there are different entities. There is the European Union, and then
Mhm.
there is the member countries. European Union is not like a federal government. It doesn't do anything. It's just a unifying body where we all agree of the things that's going to be happening. And one of the major things that we agreed on is something that's called fiscal deficit, saying that our countries cannot go below specific spending levels. We cannot
Mhm.
just borrow as much money. This is just for the safety of our all union, so we don't borrow that much, so we don't go too much into borrowing.
Okay.
What European Union agreement does, stating is like about these 800 billion, there's also additional mechanisms there about the loans, also using some of the money that has been left over from the COVID fighting package. But in general, the biggest part is basically stating that you as a member state are allowed to dip into your budget for extra funds, so you can go into the lower budget deficit
Okay.
all across Europe. So it doesn't mean that Europe is going to distribute 800 billion. It means that the countries will be able to invest more into their defense and do more essentially on borrowed money.
Okay, so that thank you for clarifying that because I misread that.
Yeah.
So I saw the facts, but I didn't have the context. That's precisely why we're doing what we're trying to do. Okay, so that just it means the cap has changed, or I guess floor, or however you want to look at it, and
Yeah.
so you're allowed to do that. Okay, now Germany alone was talking about like something crazy like 800 billion. I mean,
Yeah.
Germany alone. It looks like Mertz is serious. Do you think Mertz is serious? Because he looks like he's real serious, where Schultz wasn't. And the way that they're trying to do it, they're trying to push something through quickly before the new government takes place, which I thought was interesting since he just kind of took over, but yet there's enough support in order to do it now, which it'll be less support after.
Yes. So I'll continue to answer the previous question, and then I'll also jump to this one. So with regards to the Europe, like the 800 billion, this is also answering your question. Will they help Ukraine? Yes, because it's the spending within their own countries. So if they have more defense spending, they have more production, and they can invest. They can invest that production anywhere they want. They can invest it in Ukraine, and they can invest it in their own countries. They can invest it overseas by buying weapons if they want. So it doesn't matter where the defense budget go. Like it's just there's more possibilities. So while directly it's not that this money will go to Ukraine, any country can decide what they will do with the defense budget. That's why, for example, I don't think that Hungary is going to be opposing that, because
Yeah.
it's free money for them. Like why Orban is pretty greedy, we know that.
Yeah.
And then the non-factual. So the non-factual is the problem with a lot of the Europeans, that we still do not see this threat as existential
Yeah.
within Europe. And a lot of this was due to the messaging. Danish government has been very proactive, and we have been receiving messages in our unified system where it says, have like a emergency bag. If something goes down, you need to know like what things that you have, and have those things ready if you ever need to be within like a couple of minutes. So they started doing these messaging systems about the fact that we need to be more aware of the existing security arrangements. Massive investments and massive declarations and declaring that this is a security threat for us in Europe does this vibe thing also for Europeans, that now Europeans are acknowledging the threat more concretely, that our vibes within societies are going to start shifting, because so far it's been very business as usual, to be honest.
Mhm.
And then with
Yeah.
regards to MERS, like firstly, it kind of also goes in the previous points, but generally speaking, right, there's two parties that's going to be making the government. It's going to be Friedrich Merz, I'm using the Danish one, the CDU-CSU alliance, and it's going to be the Social Democrats. I'm not sure if they're still going to be run by Scholz or it's going to be Pistorius. It's unclear yet. But those two parties are the ones that are going to be making government. Those are the two parties that are going to be investing. And so far, it seems they agreed to having about 500 billion in general investments for infrastructure within country, and unlimited spending to defense. So there is apparently no set limit. But Friedrich Merz has been talking about 200, 300, 400 billion to defense. So they will be increasing their defense spending depending on what they decide later on. but there is
Now,
no border, like there is no limit. And that was very important because Germany is a federative government, and their federation government is actually bound by what the different parts of the Germany decide. So now they're kind of overriding it, stating, no, 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 we as a federal government will have the power to go above that. We will be able to spend more ourselves. This was the issue with providing a lot of aid to Ukraine from Germany beforehand.
so what I understand about that is that the infrastructure, it's not like, hey, let's just do these highways. It's infrastructure of a military infrastructure that has been neglected for, it's like deferred maintenance for the last 30 years or whatever. I mean, however many years that they've just been like, yeah, we don't need this. We have Ramstein Air Base here. There's no, I mean, if there's a problem, they'll be taking care of it from over the pond, across the pond, right? So
It's not
now
not
they're
just not
going,
just
you know what? We better do something to make sure that we can actually do something if we need to do something. Is that a fair read?
Yeah, yeah, it's very accurate, but it's not going to be just military infrastructure. It's just civilian infrastructure as well. Germany is the country that is still using fax machines in their services. Germany is the country that has one of the worst internet connections in Europe. It's awful. Every time I travel to Germany, I'm having trouble uploading my videos just because there is no internet outside maybe a couple of big cities. It's
Really?
insane. Like it's so backward insane. It's crazy, especially like living in Denmark where we have like one of the most advanced stuff here. It's like you're going back like 20 years.
I would have thought that would have been like Serbia, not Germany. Like that's
No.
crazy. How about that? Okay, so you were also talking about Orban as well. So what's his deal? How can he be problematic? How can he be evaded?
Orban doesn't want to spend his money. Like he wants to receive money from the EU. He obviously wants to promote Putin's narrative, get his cheap gas. He's very selfish, very greedy. So there is that for Orban. That's pretty much has been modus operandi. Every time when there was like some kind of disagreement with Hungary, so far it was over. We were able to overcome it by essentially buttering him up. That's been the
Yeah,
modus operandi. He's been basically extorting European Union
yeah.
for the money. That's why, like, I don't think that he will be standing because he's not ideologically against this. Like, he's talking about Ukraine, like he has
Oh,
his
that's really interesting.
yeah.
Holy cow, I just had a big aha. That's really, really interesting. So he's Putin's pal, but only so that he can extort, and then he'll be happy to walk away. But oh, so that's kind of like what I mean by when I say Trump. Trump is not ideologically, I don't think, in that kind of like he's got to do this. He could do this or that or the other thing, whatever works for him, whatever makes him look good, gets him a Nobel Peace Prize or whatever. If Orban's in that same camp, then he's easier to work around, which is what he's done. Okay, tell me about what about Slovakia's Fico? Is Fico like
Slova-
that?
yeah, Slovakia Fico is very simple. Did you know, by the way, that one of the biggest suppliers of ammunition to Ukraine is Slovakia? You
Is
didn't know
that
that.
right?
Fico's government has been making hand over fist the money by selling weapons to Ukraine. They have been investing into their production of weapons like crazy. And while their rhetoric has been quite like, "Oh, we're so opposed Ukraine" and so on, and they were bucking Putin and so on and so on, they have been profiting from this like crazy, and they love it. They have been
Huh.
investing, and they're supplying weapons to Ukraine like there is no tomorrow.
So why make the pitch that you're backing Putin? Is it just that it's unpopular to back Ukraine in
It's his
Slovakia?
electorate. It's his electorate, right?
Okay.
So maybe there is a lot of the electorate that it appeals to. He also was having an agreement with Putin about the gas. Maybe he just wants to present these kind of powers. This is where he sees his niche. Like it's like saying, why are you making this stupid store that sells flies? Like who needs flies? Everyone has flies. And then suddenly you realize that like a month later they're building like a big fish farm somewhere, and then they would use like fly eggs to fish those. Suddenly his business doesn't look as crazy. So he has some kind of plan
That's
and some kind of vision, some kind of audience for his vision, and he appeals to that audience. But he again, it's a lot of there's a lot of gray areas in between.
yeah. So with him particularly, you had this kerfuffle between him and Zelensky with the gas being turned off, the pipeline being turned off,
Correct.
And then Zelensky was even like, "Look, we'll pay the difference. We'll pay the hundreds of thousands of dollars difference so you're not harmed," and he wouldn't do it. Now, so is that just taking a stance in front of his people that I'm showing them while he's still making the money on the side?
Yeah,
Is
probably.
that
Probably.
okay?
It's not a far fetched. Like obviously, I don't know every underhanded deal that they're in. I don't know any kind of corruption schemes they're in. Like maybe like Gazprom is paying like if you keep up like promoting Russia, we're gonna give you like 1% of the Gazprom profits every month, so like 0.5%. I don't know how much Gazprom makes. It's like he's like, well, I still sell weapons to Ukraine. I still this, and I personally am getting like this mega rich money to my some foreign island nation bank accounts, getting
Yeah.
my money that's gonna feed me and the whole seventh generation of my family to go.
So, can you speak to Transnistria? They had a similar kind of deal, and the Moldovan government wanted to give it to them, and the Transnistrians are like, "Nope, we're going to get it from Russia eventually."
Moldova
Uh,
is difficult.
okay,
There's a
uh,
very active pro-Russian community in Moldova, right? About half of the mainland Moldova, maybe a little bit less than half, is very pro-Russian. They like not just Transnistria. So that's why, for example, Moldova, like Ukraine has already proposed many times to Moldova that they will liberate Transnistria and so on, but they don't want it. Like they want to see potentially some kind of peaceful resolution. They don't want to see antagonism. And they are afraid that if they will try to do it, it will cause essentially additional split in society and cause civil war. So there is majority of people, but as you see, if you see, follow the especially voting results, it was like just barely like over 50 something percent that voted to support European Union. So, and because Moldova has been one of the no, it's not one of the. It is was the poorest nation in Europe. I believe maybe only Kosovo can kind of match that similarly. They don't really have a lot of the cards on the table, so to say, to play and
right.
say like, no, look, Europe is so much better because they haven't been part of Europe. They didn't have the money, and Moldova has been struggling a lot. That's why a lot of the people have been looking towards Russia, and there is a huge split in society. I will go to Moldova hopefully this year, and we'll find out a little bit more and give more details on that. But it's a difficult situation for them. I would be more ballsy, but I think they're just happy with where they are, with now agreeing on the fact that the European Union is the pathway they're taking, and they're just afraid to fuck it all up.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so
Sorry for
Moldova was part of the USSR. It wasn't one of the satellites. It
It
wasn't
is
one
an
Moldovan.
artificially created state of Romania. So Stalin created Moldova as an artificial state, stating that you were always like different than the Romanians, and essentially they annexed the territory and created this quasi republic, just like the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic that Russia created right now. It's exactly the same playbook, literally one to one. And then after that,
Really?
Moldova kind of after the dissolution of Soviet, yeah, exactly. Just look it up. And then after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Moldova stayed in this state where they're not Romania anymore, but they're also not the Soviet Union, so they stayed as a separate country. And now there's been talks about Moldova again rejoining Romania, but as I just explained, there is a bit of a split within the society.
So I've been as close as Galat in Romania. Actually, funny story. I put my foot in the Danube just to say, like, see, and I almost lost my shoe in the mud. So that was not my brightest shining moment. So I've been close, but I didn't know that history. So they're essentially Romanians, and what language is?
I'm a little bit careful because nationalities are fluid and they arise sometimes spontaneously. So it's not a bit completely clear for me. I don't have the pulse thoroughly on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Moldovan
No, that's
society,
okay.
whether they feel separate than Romanians and so on. But the history of Moldova and Romania goes very intertwined, and there used to be a very structural and fundamental part within Romanian
Well, yeah,
state.
we wandered off the path of the discussion. I just found that interesting because I didn't know that background either. I've been to Romania. So speaking of Romania, Georgescu, what I mean, like he's still polling really high.
Yes.
What do you understand what may or may not happen there?
We'll see. It's a little bit interesting. There's a lot of these forces that are anti-European, pro-Russia forces. either this is susceptible because of the long running propaganda campaign. A lot of Romanians are stating that they actually didn't ever have democracy, that their state is like super corrupt. So there is a lot of issues within Romania itself. And again, I don't really have the tightest of the pulses on the specifically Romanian society. But generally speaking, I've heard like, and my Romanian friends have been telling me that Romania has significant internal problems within it with regards to who is ruling and so on. There is a lot of the anger towards the establishment. So there is like a lot of the anti-establishment movements within that. And Georgescu was kind of just pushed as a candidate, and a lot of the anti-government forces united around him.
So those seem to be the gadflies. So some states seem to have it pretty well together. Britain seems to like depend. Doesn't matter what party you're in. You seem to be supporting Ukraine. France, even Le Pen, after the Oval Office thing, was like, yeah, this isn't okay. So France is like not quite as good as Britain. Germany has been divided for some time, where they have the people that are pro Ukraine and the people that are pro peace, meaning like let's just get this over with so we can get the good times back again. So where's Denmark in this mix? Are they pretty solidly uh uh, pro Ukraine, or because
Yes,
I just don't know. Yeah, okay. Um
incredibly.
and what other countries are like, if you had to like rank order, I'm not asking you to rank order every European country, but like who are the top like really solid countries that are supporting? Poland, I would
Um,
imagine, is, and the Baltics
yeah,
are very heavily at the top.
yeah. The N8, the Nordic 8, so sorry, NB8, the Nordic Baltic 8. Everyone is pretty much on board with Ukraine. Poland, obviously. UK overall, absolutely staunch supporter of Ukraine. France is interesting because France is generally pro Ukraine, but France had a lot of the internal issues. So oftentimes their action was not really following the words that they're stating. So their rhetoric was louder than their actions. And
Okay.
this is not to diss on France. French did something that is completely non-replaceable. Like a lot of the things and on political aspect and so on, there's been huge help from France,
Mhm.
but majority of that help was political. When it comes to specific support for Ukraine, it wasn't to the highest, which is completely kind of different from Germany, where on a political aspect, it's been kind of like semi 50-50 ish with Scholz. But when it comes to the amount of support that Ukraine got from Germany, it was quite a lot. Like
Well,
percentage
well,
wise, not as much as the first countries, but the support was massive.
help me understand why Schultz was so wishy-washy.
Scholz has his party, like, and his party is extreme. Like, let's put it this way: Mertz, like the
Mhm.
governor that's coming in and saying is like invest in defense, fuck the United States. Sorry, let's go separate ways from the United States. We must support Ukraine and so on. His party is split. There's about 30% of people, maybe even more, that are saying no, no, no. Like we're still the party of Merkel. We want to have normalized relationship with Russia. We want to trade with Russia. It doesn't matter what happens with Ukraine. Let's just realpolitik. Russia already controls these regions. Let's just go with a peace deal, normalize relationship with Russia. Let's just continue living and maybe focus on our own security. In Scholz's party, it's even more. Like in Scholz's
Huh.
party, there's like someone was arguing that Scholz was actually potentially even in minority to an extent of people willing to essentially get some kind of a deal with Russia. So Scholz I've seen announced that Scholz was basically fighting upstream when he was trying to push forward against Ukraine. So he was always caving in, and he needed to pretend make this circus appearance of like being so against this help to finally agree on this. And they
Oh,
gave credit to him as a politician. I didn't, but a lot of people did. And that's the analysis that I've heard. And for me, it finally explains a lot of things and it makes
yeah.
sense. And I definitely know some of the facts that the Social Democratic Party has been a lot more favorable to Russia. But again, here we're talking about the vibes, and with the new elections coming in, we might see with the new generation of politicians coming in, we might see different perspectives.
That's really, really interesting. So he's almost like a Fico kind of character in that regard, like
No, I think he
in a
deeply
two-faced
supports
kind of.
Ukraine.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I got you. Okay. If you trace things back, it seems like you mentioned Merkel. It seems like we're here now because of downstream effects of Merkel and Clinton. Clinton for the Budapest Memorandum, and Merkel for stopping NATO presence and like I could be very wrong about that, but that's what it feels like from where we are. Do you have any thoughts of that?
No, I think a lot of things that could be said on this have already been said. Merkel was a disaster for Europe. The stagnation, no change, no improvement. The whole her legacy was that the word of like essentially stability. That Germany was like stably, we're like we were stable, strong power within Europe all this time without taking any challenges, without going forward. She was the one that established basically full reliance on the United States, give away everything, give away power, and it's a disaster
Yeah. Oh.
right now. And the worst part, obviously, was the relationship with Russia and the Nord Stream pipelines and rebuilding of the whole German economy being basically we can dominate European markets by building our economy on the cheap Russian gas because we had such a good relationship with Russia and they would sell us gas so cheaply and it was great. And all of the Baltic states, well, why would you listen to the Baltic states? They're nobodies. Like, what do they know? So, despite the fact the Baltic states were saying is like, don't sign anything, don't trust Russia, they will. No, no, no. It's like we know best because now, like I'm not sure. Do you know the guy named Kraut on YouTube? So he's a great
Mm,
guy. I recommend you trying to find out. He made a recent video, and I think he explains it a lot. That Merkel is this product of the something that was called the Ostpolitik, the politics for the East, and that it worked so well with establishing and reconciliation of Germany and their relationship with Eastern Europe. And they saw that the relationship with Russia is basically the continuation of sort of this Ostpolitik. But Kraut also in the video he explains that there has been a lot of goodwill from Europe to potentially reconcile with the Germans, whereas in Russian case, it was more about how can we exploit Germany for our own means. And if there is not that goodwill, then the whole politic of Germany just backfires. And this is hindsight what we can say that brought us to the moment that we're in. And like, don't get me wrong, I am all for people making errors. I just want them to acknowledge that. And the worst part is that Merkel still acknowledges absolutely
yeah,
zero.
she doubled and tripled down.
Yeah, correct, correct. So and that's fortunately that is the barrier that is still stopping a lot of the people in Europe. The thinking that we can come back to the February 20th, 2022, before everything went down. February, I believe 20. Oh my God, the date 23rd,
24,
23rd.
24.
So like the day before. So to the February 23rd of 2022, and then we can just continue as usual. And it was nothing happened, and that's not gonna happen.
Yeah. So, um, the irony here is rich. Where I saw something about Trump talking about like potential some folks within the Trump administration talking about restarting the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is the irony is just astonishing. When it was Trump that was warning Germany at the time, you're too dependent on Russia. They control you for your resources. And as a businessman, you would that's how you would naturally think, right? You would recognize you don't want to be beholden to just one supplier. So that was a really interesting insight. Now it's really bizarre that he's talking. Members of his administration are talking about restarting that. That's kind of crazy to me. But okay, so where do we go, like moving forward here? So Zelensky signs a mineral deal. Yes, is that
Yeah, why
probable?
not?
Like,
Why
yeah.
not?
Okay.
I was been always for the mineral deal. I think there is nothing wrong with U.S. interests being represented in Ukraine if that representation is not abusive, if it's fair. The first
Sure.
mineral deal that came in was
That was
absolutely
terrible.
atrocious. It was like a colonization agreement, basically. Since then, Zelensky and his team worked very nicely on that agreement. The agreement that we saw, final one, basically it says nothing. It just says that if we want to work together, we now have a framework on how to do it, and that's about it. Like the deal doesn't is not binding. It doesn't require anything. It doesn't do anything. a lot of the Ukrainian rare metals are more of a talking point. It's very difficult to get them out.
Mhm.
It's like it requires many times of investments. It's the same, like it's actually even more bullshit point with Russia with regards to their mineral agreement that Putin stated that we have these like what is the 500 billion or something and so on, because those minerals are like somewhere down in Siberia where it's like 3,000 kilometers for from the closest railroads. It's like good luck getting those out, and like in the same sense in Ukraine, like there is just no infrastructure for
Right.
getting those minerals and so on. So they are there. It's a great agreement for Trump to wave around and state that look, we sign an agreement, we're going to get payment back from Ukraine and so on. It's a deal like that, and it's not really obliging anyone to anything, and it kind of gets the intertwined interest in the United States on the general political level. But so there is no issue with that. I would actually even consider that a um, more kind of binding deal would still be okay if it is again fair. So this framework
Mhm.
deal, there is no issue with that. It could be signed any second, and I'm definitely going to see Zelensky trying to sign it and maybe find some kind of pathway to get relationship with Trump back in order. To put it simply, like let's put it simply, like this is the word to challenge. So for Europe, there is now two paths. One is the correct one is the wrong one. The correct the wrong one is when we like in the paths differ based on balancing how we balance relationship with the United States and what we're doing on our own, like solving our internal crisis. The correct way is we are focusing on solving the Ukraine crisis ourselves, while in the meantime,
Yeah.
politicians are kind of secondary, are taking the track, working with Trump, buttering him up, getting some kind of deals, promising negotiations, whatever, like
Yeah.
working around him, trying to maybe get some resources from the United States. And if we get them, good. That's the way to go. The
Can
wrong
Europe
way
do
to
it
go,
alone?
yeah,
Can
and the
Europe
wrong way
can
to go,
Yeah, no. The question is, can they make it happen alone? Like,
yeah,
Ukraine
sure.
has enough resources to make it through 2025, but you've got from now till the end of the year. If the U.S. was completely off the table, you've got from now till the end of the year to like make sure that you have industry up and running and all the support and all the infrastructure, and that's a big ask.
It is, but and I will make a video separately from it. Like I already made a video last time talking that it's not as big of a difference as being portrayed.
Okay.
Military help that US has been provided was about 22.33 billion per year.
Hmm.
And that includes some of the long-term agreements. So it's not just the stuff that was supplied to Ukraine; it was also stuff that was just put in the US for a long-term production.
Hmm.
So 22.33 billion is completely manageable by the Europeans plus Canada and maybe other countries in a world to supplement. It's not a crazy amount, especially if we're
Okay.
talking about the massive investments that's right now.
But
Secondly,
not to contradict, but the difference there is some of the tech. Right? Some of the bombs, the technology, that sort of thing. That's really what the key is that you really need from the US, not their dollars, that you need their technology.
and that is the video that I'm yet to be making because there has been like multiple Ukrainian commanders, not commanders, but Ukrainian fighters that came out and stating that the role of United States has been critical for Ukrainian defense. It has
Mhm.
helped us incredibly, but the moment has passed and we have been relying more and more on our strength. Over 80% of hits on targets right now is based on FPV drones, like or other types of
Okay.
drones. So absolute majority. He states we have directions where people have only heard about any kind of American or European help. There's plenty of possibilities for Ukraine to continue fighting. There is going to be harder, yes. Is it going to be problematic? Absolutely, but it's not that like there is no major tech that is going to be putting Ukrainian military at risk. When we're talking, for example, about Patriot missiles, which are probably the top thing, and I'm going
Mhm.
to touch on Starlink a bit better later, but like when we're talking about Patriot missiles, then the top thing is that they are protecting cities, civilians.
Mhm.
And I know this might sound harsh. I know this will be painful to a lot of people and inhumane, but cities are not military targets. They do
Yeah,
not
no.
directly affect how Ukrainian army is fighting. I'm sorry if this is
Yeah,
really
you're just
painful
trying
to
to
someone.
protect a large number of lives. So that's the and we
Correct.
know what Russia will be happy to do. So yeah.
Yeah, correct. And then I heard like something like BBC analysis saying that if US will stop supplying weapons, then suddenly Ukraine is going to be left with no anti-air systems. Well, that is false. Ukraine has the trouble specifically hitting down the ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
Cruise missiles and drones, Ukrainians are handling pretty well, especially with the success of their interceptor drones. And their interceptor drones are getting better and better and better and better. We're seeing many different variations, and Ukrainians are working in that direction. Uh, Long story short, United States aid has been already cut down Ukraine 3 times, and this is the
Hmm.
third time. And Ukrainians already by this point treating that this might be final, and they have been already preparing. So when we're talking about the most critical thing, the Starlink, firstly, Starlink is not being turned off. A lot of the Starlinks are being paid, for example, by Poland, and there is a lot of the legal things to do with the Starlink as an organization if they suddenly decide to turn off the Starlinks in Ukraine. But
Hmm.
secondly, is that Ukraine has been working intensely on having the substitute for Starlinks. For example, in the Kursk area, Starlinks don't work on the territory of Russia, so they were able still to get into Kursk area, set up communications network, set up fighting network, and because they saw that, like kind of after Trump was elected, that this might be the end of the help from the United States. Ukrainians are not dumb. They
Yeah,
have
yeah,
been working to prepare for agreements. Like I cannot share the information. I have some, and you actually do as well. Like you, I
yeah,
definitely know that you're in some of
yeah,
those special groups, if you know what I mean. It was
yep,
like there are people that are working on technology solutions, and that is being implemented everywhere. It's insane how much more Ukrainians are now advanced compared to 2022. And
true.
this is where my main point is, like how, for example, Europeans, we talk about Europe not having the factories and scalability of production and so on. Ukrainian production, Ukrainian weapons and so on, they're struggling to get contracts. It's only about a third of their production capacity for technology, ammunition, whatever, that is being contracted right now in Ukraine. So if there is the money just to request
Yeah.
more stuff to be
And
made,
that's really right, and that's really what it'll come down to. If Europeans are willing to open their wallets and because it's not a matter of, the tech, the Ukrainians have been crazy, amazing at being able to technologically create things in record time and get things up and running, but they have to be able to fund it. Same thing with the US. I think I could be wrong about this. I think if the Europeans were gonna be like, "Hey, look, we wanna buy this system from the US," Trump would be like, "Sure, let's make a deal." No, I'm not paying for it. When I made this deal, the Europeans had to pay their full freight. Like I can see that kind of scenario as well. So I'm not worried if there's the will, but historically there hasn't been enough will to make it over the top, except in Ukraine, where there's plenty of will. Uh, within the country, there's plenty of will.
yeah, that's
Okay.
why I was looking so much forward to these budget announcements that we're going to have just more money to spend. And that's why I'm super optimistic right now how the future looks.
Yeah, so let's talk about the future. My crystal ball is broken. Maybe yours can see it a little bit better than mine. It's too murky. It's very foggy. So how do you think things play out here? Trump wants to get everybody to the table and make a deal and have a ceasefire. Zelensky's not crazy about a ceasefire coming to the table because that'll give Russia time to recuperate. So he doesn't want to do that. So he's kind of slow walking to that kind of process. I don't think Putin really wants to make a deal. So what happens?
No, you stated clearly, like Putin doesn't want to make a deal, so they will try to drag on and make some. So we might enter negotiations. Don't get me wrong. Like there might be negotiations started between Russia and Ukraine, but that doesn't mean anything, right? Because Putin doesn't want negotiated deal. He wants Ukrainian capitulation. Zelensky, despite the fact that he wants to butter up with Trump and talk with allies and find some kind of way forward, he is not going to be signing anything that is going to be sabotaging Ukrainian
Sure.
perception. He has been rock solid
Mhm.
clear on that. And he has been now in many situations where the pressure was on him to cave in. Like just saying sorry to Trump, he never did it because there is nothing to be sorry about. And he has the balls of steel to not go forward with this. And after how Trump treated Zelensky, now there has been a huge rally around the flag effect for Zelensky. So he has full backing of the society, political parties, everything came back. So at least for additional year, year and a half, there is now a rock solid support for Zelensky. So there is not going to be a deal on the table, not an honest one, and dishonest one. There is not going to be accepted by Ukraine. So we're going to continue fighting. And if
So
we're talking about, yeah,
the idea that we have to get you to have a ceasefire so we get you to the table, I just can't see that happening. I can see negotiations starting on either side. I'm talking to them, I'm talking to them, talking to them, I'm talking back to them. But as far as a declared ceasefire, I just don't see anything like that being practical.
I mean, Zelensky put forward the requirements for a ceasefire. No, no, not for a ceasefire. Sorry, for starting negotiations. He stated that Russia and Ukraine should agree on stop long distance
Mm.
fires. So Ukraine is not targeting Russian oil infrastructure. Russia is not targeting Ukrainian civilians. The release and exchange of prisoners, everyone to for everyone. And there was beforehand talk about the children, but as far as I understood, that has been scrapped for now. So I don't expect Putin to agree on this because Putin is never
He
going to
can't.
negotiate in good faith. Like he will not negotiate with good faith. So there's going to be a lot of dragging. He will try to go around Zelensky. He will try to work with Trump and so on. But no agreement that Trump and Putin will agree together will be accepted by Ukraine. If US will lift sanctions, it's not going to help that much because there is not that much mutual trade between Russia and United States. Majority of those sanctions that are hurting Russia are coming from the European Union. And while there will be more potential for Russia to substitute a lot of their components, trade, for example, with China more openly, but the biggest sanction on Russia is the war itself. That is what draining Russia the most. Right now,
Mhm.
Russia is in a terrible situation, absolutely awful. Like the amount how much bluff they can put out, despite the fact that they are in a complete garbage dump right now and it's on fire, it's actually impressive. Like, to be honest, that is impressive because their army is like they're not using donkeys for nothing. Like the whole joke about donkeys, like when people say like, well, maybe Ukraine would also be using donkeys or horses, and I was like, yes, I understand because Ukraine is a smaller country with less resources and trying to do anything for survive. But Russia is supposedly the aggressor. They're supposedly fighting a war where they're stating that we can militarily capture the whole of Ukraine. And the third year in, and now their logistics are based on donkeys. It's embarrassing. Like it's embarrassing. So Russian stockpiles are running empty. They're not really having good amount to substitute. Their military is basically becoming like just a human body based military. They will have huge troubles advancing. They still have the capabilities for maybe additional half a year campaign or so for push,
Yeah.
but after that they will be maximum maintaining the front line. And we already see that Ukrainians are pretty capable, and if they continue investing in their own defenses, if Europeans are continue investing, that's it. Russia run out of their big stockpiles, their big advantage. Now we're finally getting into some kind of a level playing field, so to say.
Yeah, so you're watching the numbers like I am, and in the last month, it went down from 1,500 average to 1,200 average. Like it's been a precipitous drop. You look at the number of attacks on the battlefield, and it's been a precipitous drop there too. What's going on with Russia that they're not able to do it? I genuinely don't understand what it is. I think I have some sense of it, but I don't know that I have it down.
Basically, they exhausted themselves. They exhausted their attacking potential. Uh, a lot of people are presuming that to fight a war, you just need to get guys, put them in one place, and send them over. But it's a bit more difficult than that. Like it needs to be organized. There needs to be communications between other parties. We don't think about this because we think like Russians are just fighting like barbarians, which they not. They're actually relatively capable. It's just their capabilities are not the best, and they're using quite archaic tactic, but they are learning somewhat, especially the lower level you get, kind of the more on the ground you get, the kind of the more competent Russians become. So, for example, like a squad commander will care about a lot more about his squad members. And then once you get to the like the lieutenant and then higher, that's when like caring for these grunts is not something that people really think about that much. But again, it varies from time to time. The point is that everything has a limit. Everything has a limit. And a lot of the Russians right now, on the high of their offensive, as they were pushing forward, they just said like, well, Ukrainians are collapsing. Let's just go, everyone. So they started pulling their reserves just to, for that moment, just before the Trump's inauguration, for his time in the office, just to show us like, look, we're advancing so much. It's exactly, just put it on timeline. Just like see that chart
Yeah.
of Russia dropping their offensives, and suddenly it's like, wait, so Trump got into office, this is January, this is where they got into the first negotiations. And then it's like a steep drop off. It's like, oh, it's like Russia actually planned to do maximum effort right before he comes to office. So it looks like Ukraine cannot do anything and we are like advancing. No, they were just overexhausting their resources.
Yeah. I think there's an effect with drones being used like close air support. I think that's part of the package as well. That's just my read, but I think they do seem more exhausted than than what they seemed like in November and January, certainly. And I think January and February they were just their order was maximum pressure, and that's the height of where they would be able to get to. Okay, you were talking about the last couple of things. You were talking about the Russian economy. I fear that we might accidentally rescue the Russian economy because I've said for a long time now, I don't see it ending on the battlefield. I see it ending with a economic or political collapse in Russia, and their economy's in real trouble. Is that your read? Like, so if they keep fighting, is that what happens? And last question here is do they does this end in 2025 or push on into 2026?
So first and foremost, I don't subscribe to people saying that Russian economy is about to collapse. I don't think so. Economies are a lot more robust systems than it seems. Like sometimes economies collapse just very rapidly because of the other forces at play. So the economy just goes down, nosedive, and then just some other forces, they just don't accept the current status quo and they come into play, and that's why economy collapses, despite the fact that maybe on numbers that economy could be still quite strong for like years to come. Russian economy still has the capacity. So, for example, um, and the biggest challenge for Russia is 2025 is the pain year. Beforehand, Russia had a big national wealth fund, which
Mhm,
basically was a war chest for Putin. It has the money in it to sustain it. It's gone. That's it. Like this year is like, and actually like it's pretty much already is empty. So 2025 is the last year of Russia covering some of their budget deficit by some of the money that they had. It's not a lot, but they still have some a little bit. Like I believe it's like $50 billion. That's it. They don't really have anything else. So after that, they will start cutting. So they will start cutting their life flesh, like of their economy. Like it's
mhm,
going to be probably first and foremost marginal classes, like all of the social services and so on. But they will start cutting into the life tissue of their
mhm,
economy, and there are plenty of life tissue to cut still. But this is where I said we start seeing potentially some of the non-market forces playing out. I don't expect 2025 to be that year within the Russian economy that's going to decide it. I think there's going to be a lot more pain. I think there's going to be a lot more pain in 2026. And if we're talking about potentially lifting sanctions, what will that allow is essentially get them a little bit more leeway. So
mhm.
a little bit less flesh they will need to cut away, but they will still need to do it. So it will prolong it more. So I think the Russian economy, especially if we're going to lift the sanctions, is still able to function for years. But it starts getting the possibility of the non-market forces playing out. So that's something we definitely need not let go easily. When it comes to the uh, pressure from Ukraine, that's also big pressure from the economy. Russian economy is run on oil, and Ukrainian with their drone strikes are inflicting massive costs on the Russian economy. And they're continuously doing that. And if this will just continue, again, it will rise and like the kinetic sanctions of Ukraine will impose more and more effort, more and more price on the Russian economy. And then finally, I'll just repeat what I said before, that sanctions are important. They are helping speed up
Mhm.
the degradation of the Russian economy. But the main and absolutely main driver of Russia and why it's not getting well is the war itself. No proper investor wants to go into Russia while
Mhm.
they're at war. Like Russia needs money, they need foreign investment, literally foreign direct investment. They're starving for it. Their economy is just like eating itself alive and will be eating, as we discussed. And they need foreign investments. And foreign investments, especially with Russia nationalizing a lot of them, like essentially taking the property, no one wants to go in just to get their investments being nationalized.
Sure. Sure, absolutely. So now, like, let's say the war ended tomorrow, the economy on a war footing is going to like you can't just change back to well, go back to work at McDonald's and J.C. Penney and wherever else. Like that's some of these businesses are no longer, or some of the like the supply chains are no longer intact because they've been trying to build ammunition and things along these lines. So there's going to be huge disruption, and that could be something that could also be throwing them into some political chaos as well. So I think Putin understands enough about that to know that he's got to kind of keep going. So that's another factor that I see that seems to tell me that they're not ready to shut that things down anytime soon. Does it end in 2025? That's my last question for you.
No,
Okay, that's pretty clear. Well, did you have any sense of how much longer things could go? Because I think it's an existential fight for the Ukrainians. It's a nice to have for the Russians, but it's existential for the Ukrainians. So they just keep going until they can go no more.
I think this is a question. It's always been a question of resources. Like if the European Union goes forward with their investments, if they supplement the 2/3 that resources that Ukraine has to increase the production, then we might see that after 2025, Ukraine starts overtaking Russia with their output, and that will result in essentially Ukrainians slowly retaking some of the ground from Russians. Um, if it goes then in 2027 and continue going on, because Europeans are expecting the 4-year plans, in 2026, there is elections in Hungary. If suddenly Hungary is now being more democratic and there is like a consensus within the European Union, well, then the sky's the limit for Ukraine. We can see 2027, 2028 could be potentially where, if all things equal, Ukraine can militarily kick Russians away out from the majority of territory. That's a realistic expectation. But if there is like additional forces, if US starts supplying weapons to Russia, if China suddenly decides testing their own troops in Ukraine and starts sending their troops to Ukraine, then we get into a very weird situation
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah. Well, short of what you can't see, like China, like there were some articles about that today about China maybe having some troops somehow in there to kind of get some experience. Oh, I'm like, oh, good grief. Okay, but short of what we can't see, with what we do know right now, you don't seem to have any faith in Trump, the great deal maker.
it's not that I don't have faith in him. It's just like he says he wants to make a deal, no matter what kind of deal and so on. He basically states he doesn't care about Ukraine. Like he just wants to go forward with it and so on. And for me, that just exclude. And when he says like I'm not supplying weapons to Ukraine, I just try to exclude him from any kind of equations and so on. So if he supplies weapons to Ukraine, great. If he doesn't, well, then we go further and so on. So it's not that I don't believe it. It's just I like to think about things that we can influence. My hope is that in 2 years there's going to be a change in Congress, and then we can get a window opportunity to potentially do something. But I don't know if it happens. Good. If it doesn't, then it doesn't.
I'm not sure how much that change will matter as far as Trump still has to sign the final deal, even if Congress were to totally flip. I mean, unless you had a two-thirds House and two-thirds Senate where they could override, but that they're nowhere near that. Um, It wouldn't do a lot. But okay, Georgie, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. This was a wealth of insight. I hope the viewers are as impressed as I am with some of the things that I just hadn't seen or couldn't see from where I was sitting. And so, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. It was a very, very nice. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this. I appreciate any second of your time.